Hi everyone. Happy Friday. Psychoanalysis Day at Sublation Media. In quite a few ways, we've got quite a special episode today. Before we do that, just to say, as we said last week, we now have our own Patreon, and we're recording a kind of B-side most weeks for patrons, and we're also at the moment the audio-only podcast is available for patrons. So it'd be great if you guys would support us, and thanks so much for listening anyway, sharing and so on. We really appreciate it, and thanks to the people that have already joined the Patreon. It's really nice to see. So yes, I am today going to interview as the interviewee my normal co-host interviewer.
The day has finally come where the hypothetical podcast where I am the person.
I mean, I think this is a good idea. I mean, I don't want to do the reverse where you interview me, but I think this is a good idea for people to see sort of what we do actually, and also part of the reason, or one reason, is that Eliot's book has recently come out, which is on the question of the ego. As people probably know, Eliot is a clinical therapist, a practicing psychotherapist with a sort of psychoanalytic theory history as well, and he's written a great book, which we did a book launch together in London not so long ago, about the question of the ego and its relationship to psychoanalysis and to society today. And the book is actually available for free, and the link to that is in the description. So you can go down there to the description, give us some money on Patreon, and let us give you a free book.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, this will be interesting for me as well. I mean, I know we talked about it before, but let's start at the beginning. I mean, so just give us obviously your book emerges from your own clinical practice, but it's also a cultural critique of sort of contemporary capitalism and so on. So give us a little sort of summary of how you came.
So I start off the book with an introduction about why this concept is so difficult for me to talk about in psychoanalytic circles, and I think maybe you'll get to see the introduction quite clearly if you click in that description and read the intro about why do people kind of fuzz out when grasping this concept of egoism and the ego are kind of brought together in this kind of psychoanalytic theory. There is a kind of radical core based in kind of Max Stirner that this is working from. So this kind of makes it a bit tricky, which is why are we kind of returning to Max Stirner? One of Conrad's kind of questions was, well, didn't Marx critique Max Stirner? And so ergo, we've forgotten about Max Stirner and egoism in general. One of the problems... Oh yeah, Alfie.
Just before you go on, just on what you've already said, you know, two things? Can you say what egoism is? And I mean, are you sort of like you mean that when we call someone an egoist, we're saying, you know, a sort of big-headed narcissist or something,
right? That is
on the other hand, we've got this concept from psychoanalysis of the ego, you know. So you're asking the question of how does the psychoanalytic concept of ego?
It's a really dirty concept, and egoism is a dirty concept for good reasons, because it's applied so poorly. Egoism is an ethical theory. There's ethical egoism, and then there's psychological egoism, and this kind of combines both. Psychological egoism is the idea that everything you do is in your self-interest, right? This is like a theory of action. You could say, and this is the kind of where this book kind of goes from, an axiom that anything I'm doing currently can be called self-interest. So I'm holding my hands like this. Mm-hmm. I'm articulating myself in the world. We can also understand this rationally as self-interest. And there's an extensive proof for that. But then there's this other ethical egoism question. And this is where the problem is, which is it is ethical to act in your self-interest. As soon as you say this, you have a problem, because what is self-interest is widely defined. And Max Stirner defines it as a kind of bodily self-interest contra all ideals and ideas, right? Mm-hmm. An anti kind of Hegelian reading. Ayn Rand is the world's most famous egoist theory. So already you can see we run into some problems.
Mm-hmm.
Self-interest is participating in capitalism and upholding capitalism, right? So that's why this book is kind of necessary, because if you want to be an ethical egoist, I want to explain to you in detail what is self-interest from a psychoanalytic point of view, and maybe a more kind of Hegelian, Lacanian point of view, but really a Hegelian point of view too.
So if I've got this right, you're saying that there's certain kinds of egoism, let's say, which, very much feed a capitalist system. Obviously those. I mean, I'll just get you to sort of explain who Max Stirner was, I think, in a second. But like, it's obvious in the case of someone like Ayn Rand that this is the kind of neoliberal, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, individualist society, neoliberal capitalism. So egoism has played a function in the recent history, even probably since the 80s in particular, as a sort of theory of which brings subjects in line with contemporary capitalist structures and so on. But you're trying to identify via psychoanalysis another kind of egoism, which you're calling ethical egoism, if I'm getting this right.
I would call it dialectical egoism.
Okay,
right?
Dialectical egoism, which is
and Greg Sadler did a nice review of my book. He said I didn't quite accomplish the synthesis of ethical and psychological egoism, but I think I did. And I could kind of further expand.
So I mean, maybe we could cover. I mean, I think that we covered the first part is fairly clear how egoism feeds in a particular capitalist system in a certain sense. So maybe you could try and sort of explain why you do want to recover a kind of ego. You said there that self-interest is part of acting ethically. I agree with this. I think that it is kind of instinctively true that you can look after yourself, and it's part of your duty to do so, an ethical duty to do so, not just without being a narcissistic egoist.
The bigger challenge is to understand exactly what is the process when you're helping another person, how you're helping yourself. And this is kind of like, this is where the question gets uglier and uglier. In terms of people have a harder and harder time searching for this kind of line, which is true in terms of when I'm helping another person, I'm acting in my self-interest, but how, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the theories of that are based in evolutionary biology, which are lacking quite a bit. The most recent kind of research on this is kind of altruism theory, in terms of, when I do altruism, reciprocal altruism is actually delayed altruism, gratification for myself, and actually it will come back to me. But the problem is this is consequentialist, it's utilitarian, and thus it kind of misses the main thrust of the point. And this is what I researched in graduate school, which is people do things even when they don't ever get anything back. In fact, they would rather do something for somebody else and not have them do something nice in return than to make it a transaction. So these theories are wrong.
So how do you account for the fact? I mean, you're totally right. Like, especially in relationships, for example, there's definitely a great deal of self pleasure coming from doing something for the other, which is kind of almost ruined if it's returned or something. Exactly. It's not transactional. So how do you account for this like human instinct to do something for someone else in this way?
Right. This is where you get into the book, right? Before this, I mean, I really should probably, before I get into friendships and interpersonal, the short answer is friendships in the interpersonal relationship. The long answer is we go back to Freud. We return to psychoanalysis, and we go to free association. And we understand what is happening when an Alizand is free associating.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you about free association. So you've talked about this in the book. It's a fun topic that people associate with psychoanalysis. So maybe you can talk about what you wrote about free association and what you think about this.
Right. So, like I said, the short answer to your question is, why do you do this? And I almost give like a non-answer. Friendship, interpersonal relationships, and you're okay. Right. So this is why you have to return maybe to the beginning, which is when you free associate, you create something which will outcompete your analysis of it. Right. So one of the biggest challenges of analysis, or one of the kind of impotent qualities of analysis in general, you could say, is it's simply slower than the forces it's analyzing, kind of always.
You mean so I mean, do you mean free association in the sense that, when you just start following up one word with another, so you're just
but even like that sentence, like there's a way to analyze your question to me, which I could then analyze, and we can talk about the form it's in, this format, the interpersonal relationships, the motives behind that, right? And the problem is there's so many compounded forces in a moment that the ego generates, that it outcompetes the analysis.
Yeah. So the cognition kind of runs ahead of any possible analysis of it.
Well, I would say the total creation of a being outcompetes that being's analysis of itself. So in an analysis, is ultimately what you're doing is you're deciding to grab a hold of an essence, with a goal to that essence. In psychoanalysis, the goal is mental health treatment. So then you run into another problem in terms of what is mental health treatment, and we could call it negating symptoms, right? Something like this happened and it made me feel bad. Okay, so now we're going to shift out of articulation freely, and now we're going to do this kind of almost weak gesture of analysis. But the reason we're doing this is because we're trying to take away force from the symptom, or we're trying to negate what we're calling symptomatic in a person that's causing kind of overwhelming. Freud would call it like neurotic distress, and we're trying to remove neurotic distress, right?
But how does I mean, I think I'm following, but how does this answer pertaining to free association have to do with a dialectical egoism, shall we say?
Right. So the dialectical egoism is understanding you're doing two things. Like we can frame it another way, because this is a large nominal object, which is human existence, right? So and that is what we're doing, is we're analyzing human existence to a certain extent. Another way to put it is I articulate things, I create, but not only do I create, I also destroy, right? And this is kind of this tension, which is when I'm in the world, I'm creating certain things, which are moments, but I'm also breaking things. I'm changing things outside of myself, and there's a couple problems here again, which is sometimes when you break something, you free up things, you're doing something positive. Sometimes when you create something or bring people together, you're doing something negative in terms of, I'm going to, bring together everybody under a Trump flag or something, and I'm going to find all the Trumpers and I'm going to bring them together and we're going to have a Trump rally or something, right? You're bringing people together through an idea, but also it also will create a certain force, and you don't want to create that force, right? So there's a second problem, which is when you bring things together, you're doing two things. You're bringing the oceanic feeling, but you're also bringing the superego, because now I'm saying your differences are going to be obscured, right? And we're bringing ourselves together to do something, just like we bring ourselves together to do this, but ultimately we decide that the force of what we're doing is a positive result, right? So there's this existential analysis, which is, do we want to be doing this? And say, well, yeah. So this is psychological egoism in a way, which is we're understanding that psychological egoism is not just a vague idea that doesn't tell us enough, but psychological egoism is in fact a force as powerful as Freud's sexual drive. You know, in
Right.
terms
I
of
mean, okay. So
determining
there is
human.
something. That's
Yeah,
something worth pausing on. I mean, so you're so you're essentially saying that it's one of the originary driving functions of human, and the way Freud talks about the sexual, it's a sort of underpinning human behavior at all points. You're saying, perhaps also you could say this of the death drive, or which maybe or maybe not a sexual drive, but you're saying that there's a kind of egoism which is fundamental to the way humans are driven, and so there's a motivation. So you don't think that that a sex drive underpins egoism? You think that they
I
operate
think there is a sex drive, and sexual desire is a force. We understand it as sexual desire, and Freud does a really good job of tracing how that force affects people. But I would say it's not always the primary force, right? In terms of, you can look at sexual desire as a substance, right, as an idea, and we can trace sexual desire in terms of, if I was to trace sexual desire in my life right now, very kind of immediately I would grasp, I'm married, there's a structure to my sexual desire, right? But this is kind of what Freud, maybe he like kind of looks over the positive aspects of this kind of structure, right? I kind of see Freud as, I think he does understand the importance of the structure of sexual desire. But there's I would say there's a problem. There's like actually a philosophical problem with ego versus sexual desire. I would say sexual desire is a bit more specific. So it's more kind of direct substance. So to posit an ego substance is actually the same problem that they faced 1,000 years ago in Chinese philosophy with qi, right? So and bear with me, Alfie. I'm connecting the lines.
I'm trying to connect things.
I'm connecting the lines, Alfie. No, right. The problem with qi is everything. Ergo, it's a monistic source. Qi is what brings your eyeballs from the blood, right? So there's kind of like, it's kind of medically incorrect, right?
Yeah. It's like a little bit like humor theory, or it's like to do with like like those medieval humor theory where different like types of bile have different psychological effects.
The problem is it's an essence. Qi was positing itself as a substance, when in fact you could make an essential theory of qi which described the substance of blood, which described the material of blood, that would not be inaccurate.
So
but qi in Chinese medicine is inaccurate. So I'm saying, like what I'm trying to do here with ego is not make the same mistake that Chinese philosophy makes with qi, in terms of calling what is actually an essence in terms of a combination of a lot of different substances. That's what an essence is, right? And I'm trying to make it more specific. So in terms of the kind of substantial moment of ego, which is the indivisible moment, is kind of the actual moment for people. And then, the analysis of the outside of that, then you are bringing in the question of essence and other kind of forces, and forces of other people, right? And other people's creations, and what's already in the world outside of myself. Right, I'll pause.
I got a little bit lost on the last point, but the idea that I think it's actually very interesting and important, that the point that you're making about essence here, and I get the idea of, so you're saying we falsely think of ego as substance, right? As if
we posit things that is as self-interest, which is substance, right? In terms of, for the capitalist, making money, line going up is self-interest, period. Anything else is ignored. But this is, of course, this is like understood as making money, an idea which, so it's divisible from self-interest into the idea of making money. So it's not substance, right? In a philosophical sense.
Yeah. I suppose I'm wondering what is the connection between psychoanalysis and this kind of Chinese way of thinking or humoral theory. Like, it is interesting, isn't it, that because Freud is, as you say, specifically sort of looking at not seeing these drives as emanating from the bodily, in this kind of like instinctive biological way, right? It's not that the id is inside you or the ego is inside you in this kind of in this kind of it's not a substance,
right?
it's
It's psychology, and this is what Freud worked against, to prove that hysteria was not a physical manifestation of the womb.
Exactly.
And Freud kind of did, one of his controversial papers was male hysteria, which was controversial not because he was saying hysteria, which is why he's controversial now, but because he was saying that
it was a man.
It's psychological. The substance is psychological. It's not a physical ailment, right? And this is controversial. What is psychology? Everything, in the 19th century, everybody's pinning down, they're dividing up the body. Freud is searching for gonads and eels. Everything is about the physical evolutionary biology, right? And that's where science kind of, after Darwin went.
Yeah. So let's come back then. So to this question of self-interest and ego. I still feel like you were towards the end there, you were bringing in this idea that this is to do with like being in the world, basically, like it's inseparable from this kind of self-interest is inseparable from interpersonal relationships and other people's desire and the production desire with others and so on. I think that's quite interesting. And obviously your first, so-called false answer was friendship, right? So, one of the things that seems to be emerging here is that
it's just not enough without understanding what a friendship is, an articulation and a structure and a unity which has super egoic qualities to it in terms of I can't break it immediately, right? It's something, because I can't break it immediately, that it has an imperative to maintain itself together, right? So yes, friendship. Why are you doing it? Friendship. But what is friendship, right? Friendship's when we do nice things together. But like in a in the dialectical egoist sense, it's this process.
No, I mean, that's why I want you to explain. So tell us, answer that. Like, in what way, how would you explain friendship in the context of, in the terms of dialectical egoism?
Right. I would say friendship I describe in the book as kind of one of the least complicated human relationships, because it's based off of agreements, interpersonal intuition. I agree that I'm a friend with a person. It's not mediated necessarily by a work structure. It's not mediated by. It can be like we could be friends, Alfie. No, but I mean, you can have a friendship outside of this kind of work structure. It's a intuition that you're kind of interacting with somebody. So before friendships, actually, what I talk about in terms of a friendship is an interpersonal relationship. And the problem with interpersonal relationships is they're still divisible. This is the problem of substance, right? Oh, I'm at the real thing. It's like, well, no, sorry. Friendship is divisible. It's interpersonal. There's something prior. And in friendships, there's agreements, right? I'm agreeing to speak with you. There's also self-reflected identity, which we understand ourselves, which we mediate our friendships. I'm a leftist. You're a leftist. If I said, I am a Trumper, he's going to win in 2024, and I would talk about this all the time, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
I'd still be friends.
And I'm not a closet Trumper. I'm just giving an example of why identity mediates friendships, right? And so what I outline in the book is there's agreements which are intuitive. There's, in a Hegelian sense, will doubled back on itself as identity or subjectivity. And then in another Hegelian sense, double back on itself is order, in terms of, for instance, sci-fi is an order, the Labor Party is an order, right? So these are our kind of identities in the world, right? So all these things mediate friendships.
No, I think that's a good. I think that's correct. I mean, and I suppose a lot of that is like the myth of friendship or the ideology of friendship, because there is, and in a sense, and would you presumably agree that just in the same way that there is no sexual relationship, there is no friendship, right? And maybe that's what you mean by.
Well, I would say sure, you could look at friendship as having myth. And if I even covered that before, the negative power of myth and what I call the hyperstates relationship to myth, but like I'm not trying to confuse.
But I suppose
psychological egoism's exact analysis in relation to myth, which is saying myth is necessary for things to function, right?
I think what I was wanting to say was that like, you know, this is, you know, when this actually makes, in my opinion, it makes friendship or a relationship, well, let's stick with friendship, you know, it makes friendship into quite a necessary and almost romantic kind of buttress against the wider world and the situation of capitalism. Because, like, I understand what you're saying, that everything has to be in place. A friendship doesn't exist in isolation. These feedback loops of identity, of recognition, and so on, the superego that's produced by a friendship, the wider already existing superego or structures that might be provided by platforms or institutions and so on, are the mediators of the friendship, and the friendship doesn't exist except for in those terms. But at the same time, also, doesn't that make friendships, due to their kind of emergence within and as part of the wider network of things in the world, they become a kind of mechanism for dealing with your place and surviving in this world?
Right, absolutely. They can act as homeostasis for the individual and also, like you said, buttress against outside forces. In fact, the outside force, when they confront a group versus confronting an individual, might do so in a different way. Like, you know, a boss confronting a single worker, hey, do you want a raise? Versus like a group of workers. Now you're dealing with, you know, an identity of I'm a worker, and now you're like, oh, shit. Right.
So that covers friendship. But wait, actually, one last thing on it.
Yeah.
You know, are you? Then we can talk about another type of relationship. But you know, can you just clarify what role, like in the simplest way you can? I mean, you know, how does that, what we've just said about friendship and analysis of friendship, which I agree with, think is good, how does that relate to this dialectical self-interest that you see as a sort of positive potential at the core of subjectivity? Like, is that you need these friendships, part of your motivation?
I would say it's a massive part of what is self-interest. When you go back to that question of what does self-interest sublation media, what does self-interest sublate into, right? These basic categories of like even before interpersonal stuff. Oh, Jesus.
We didn't have our branding. There you go. Just there. It wasn't structuring the
articulation.
It wasn't structuring the
egoism,
enough.
structural egoism. No, but really, one thing about I hope that people, when they read my books, they might be like, oh, is this the most important? I never want them to read it and say that's just wrong, right? I really want you to be picking up a theory of mind and a theory of egoism and a theory of self-interest that is correct. And when you have a correct theory of this process, you're getting something which is actually beyond synthesis. You're getting this kind of dialectical analysis, which kind of, as we started off, is the forces of creation are always more vital kind of than their analysis by virtue of, I would say, I'm going to use the word, their accelerationist core, in terms of it's a process beyond human recognition that you can't stop, and that compounds,
so
right? Which has exponential, it has exponential potentiality.
Even if they analyze your book and don't like it, it's secretly worked on them already in a more powerful way.
It's correct. I would say that, is my goal for it to work on them? And no, my goal is, I think, partly I'm articulating something which is correct, which also is my tool, right? This is my tool for work. It's also for work, right? So you can see how it links together kind of self-referentially as well. And insofar as it's an accurate tool, I help other people And you can already kind of see egoism. Well, even if you don't like it, it helps other people. So, so go suck on an egg.
So you know, a minute ago,
right?
Yeah. No, I mean, a minute ago, you said you use friendships as one of the least complicated relationships.
Right.
You know, what other kinds of relationships do you cover that are more complicated, should we say?
Right. I would say the final chapter of kind of the interpersonal covers the tendency of order to counteract identity, right? Which is to say, I understand myself in various ways. I understand myself as a type of person. I understand my interests as articulating different things. But nonetheless, when we enter into a structural order, which is kind of beyond friendship, now we're creating sci-fi, which is actually a relatively fun project. Or if you're into a coal mine, that's a less fun project, but it's nonetheless, they're both examples of order. I'm in an order. I'm a worker. There's a boss. There's a thing we're doing. My identity is subsumed into this process, right? And this is kind of where Marxism can come in as well, which is like, well, what's the significance of the process and how can this big process change, right? I don't cover Marxism. I think plenty of other people understand it in a deeper sense than myself. But I think, but this is the potentiality, and it's also saying, I think it follows Zizek's line where your boss kind of saying, "Well, how's your day? Did you have a good fuck this weekend?" Is actually not the thing. It's not the most real thing. There's a dialectically more important level, which is order. Also, the imperative to enjoy, which is I've been informed this is a British thing to ask, which is, well, do you really want to? It's like, well, this almost isn't the right question, because must I truly enjoy?
Yeah, that's true.
Are you enjoying enough? I've heard this is a British idea.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yeah. But are you saying that the relationship?
But it's ideological. Right.
Is it, when you say it's connected to order, you know, are you saying the relationship provides order, or order makes the relationship possible?
Order, there's an order which is higher than a friendship. Order can destroy a friendship. Alfie, somebody goes to you and says, "You're going to work for me, and I'm going to give you $1 million. Your only qualification, you can't talk to Eliot anymore."
Yeah.
You might say, like, well, I like Eliot, but
yeah, I would
but like my identity and our friendship is going to be overcome by this order. And this is what happens in capitalism as well.
I agree
in
with
actual fact that happens, right?
I'd still be friends with you if you were a secret Trump supporter.
I'm not.
But not if I was paid £1 million to.
But not if you're paid £1 million.
Yeah. But okay. But I
that's
think
capitalism. It's important to recognize and pause for a second. That $1 million example sounds extravagant, but executives are paid a lot more than $1 million, and they do a lot more things to people which exploit them. It's not just being not their friends, but I'm going to. Okay, how about I pay you $10 million? Only thing is you have to make this group of 1,000 people as efficient as possible. And that doesn't matter what happens to their personal lives. That doesn't matter if somebody dies. That doesn't matter if they're about to die. You're going to squeeze the life out of them. That's why order is bigger than interpersonal, in terms of it has this effect of challenging your identity. I'm a good person who's a friend. Oh yeah, well, if you don't have a strong socialist ideological background, once someone offers you $10 million to exploit a warehouse of Amazon workers, then you're probably going to just do it without question, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I want to ask is, how you are gonna, how does this, on the one hand, I want to say that, this is really interesting, this question of order. On one hand, I want to say that increasingly in consumer capitalist society, let's call it, to use an old phrase, friendships, for instance, or interpersonal relationships, whether they're, sexual relationships or friendships, have become like any other commodity, almost infinite without order. The structure has been, and of course, this goes back to the demands of May 68, and enjoy without, what's the phrase, enjoy without limitation, and so on.
Right.
Break down boundaries and be liberated from the things in society which are prohibiting you from enjoying. And then of course you get, as you pointed out yourself, the injunction to enjoy, and this idea of infinite pleasure and pursuing pleasure and so on. And then I would say that even friendships and relationships have become commodities in this way. You're not supposed to have the same pair of Nike trainers, or I'm told they're Nike trainers by some American.
Nike trainer. You could say Jordans would be the more American one.
Yeah,
because those are the sought after ones.
Same pair of shoes. You're also not supposed to have the same relationship. You're also not supposed to have the same friendships. So I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned your own situation where you're married and your desire is in this structure. You then mentioned how important and critical order is for the existence and maintenance of friendships and so on. So how would you contextualize this? Are you making an argument which opposes this capitalist trend to almost break down structure and order in favor of a kind of infinite pursuit of happiness?
Well, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the heart of this analysis is made possible by Zizek in Zizek's kind of analysis of ideology. I would say I don't necessarily agree with him. You could, in terms of the glasses on, glasses off, and this is my secret shame, which is my cover of my book is glasses off, which is what Zizek says glasses on is actually ideology. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there is something there's kind of something rotten in this kind of casual interpersonal liberal democratic ideology, which forecloses the knowledge that order actually trumps this kind of interpersonal relationship. And I'm opposed to that insofar as I think that to the extent which capitalism and various processes kind of overcome interpersonal relationships, I think we could go one by one. I think gamification, like you do, is this is a process, right? We can analyze what gamification does and so on. But I think I definitely know my limit. My limit in terms of what does this psychological theory do? The psychological theory wants to kind of emphasize that order and structure is important. Whatever you're feeling when you're creating it, does something which is a process. The limit is the amount of processes are fucking exponentially large, infinitely large, nearly.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought, I agree with that. And I think that's fine. I mean, what I thought you might say is something like it's self-interest to create and maintain structures. And I think this is very important. Now, let me finish the point because I hope I'm right. I think that I wonder whether, at the heart of this, it's the positive, as you put it, dialectical self-interest, which is causing you to produce and maintain structures. Now, that is very Freudian in a sense, and it makes perfect sense. And it also instinctively makes sense that we want to create structures around us and stuff. Now, the mistake that is made, I think, in critical theory capitalism discussions on Twitter is to think that this is a negative thing or a selfish thing or a narcissistic thing or an egoistic thing. Like, you're looking after yourself, you're protecting yourself. Now,
it's almost like saying speaking is a negative thing. You might as well say speaking is a negative thing. If
there's a good self-interest that's producing structures, this makes perfect sense to me from a communist, let's say, or socialist perspective, because if you can do it for yourself, you can do it for others and with others. And so, if the production of structures is the positive self-interest, which is looking after yourself, it's also the same process that we need to look after others, right? The creation of structures and maintenance.
Precisely. Structures will be created whether you don't. This is where analysis can help, which is if we reflect and understand that a structure is self-interest with a process and with ideas that have a certain force, then we can adjust that structure by those bases rather than, but it's a really old structure and it's kind of nice. Shouldn't we maintain it and valorize it because it's really old? And then history is like, this is the reactionary position.
But I think also, I feel like I've really got it now all of a sudden. The point about friendship, you made earlier, that the friendship can be a buttress against the forces of capitalism. Now, so producing the structure of friendship can be a small micro opposition to the wider world in which that friendship emerges. But at the same token, bigger structures could be built to oppose the capitalist system or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
right? So,
precisely.
If self-interest is the driving force of the creation of these structures, then self-interest is also the ally of communism, socialism, anti-capitalism, or whatever it might be.
Right.
I'm there after 39
cool.
minutes.
Well, and that's why in section 2B, although you articulate it nicely, that's why I kind of delineate only kind of three things, which is knowledge of the good. There are people that are leaders of the good. And then there's territory for the good, right? In terms of there's something outside of people, which are the institutions and their processes for these kind of structures, right?
Yeah. But I think that's great. I mean, I did read the book and got some of these points, but I feel like I've finally sort of arrived at a feeling that I've understood parts of your argument and also its importance and why, for instance, the left should care about this and why the left should wrest the self-interest back from the Ayn Rand types or the capitalists, and that's actually that's great, Eliot. You've done a great book there, I think.
Thanks. Alfie, it started on a question of egoism and what, and democracy. Like my initial kind of question that interested me in egoism when I was still in school, I hadn't studied Max Stirner yet, was why do people vote if their vote doesn't mathematically count? Lots of argument. What if it does count, right? But I would say, well, this is like less important than people vote even though it doesn't count. This kind of shows that there's something behind the veil, and that veil is this kind of motive. Like I think the initial kind of reading is I identify with this group, and thus the group wants me to vote, so I do. But then there's a deeper analysis, which is, well, it's okay to analyze the force of your vote, and it's it's okay to vote, but I would say it's missing something if you don't understand that your individual vote will most likely never count for any election in liberal democracy. So if you want to have a force that's that's probably not a good message to broadcast to everybody, but because maybe we'll want people to vote for something somewhere. You still vote anyway, because there's 1,000 of you. But individually, as you can understand not only that self-interest is in altruism, but that it has a force in that it's an idea, and that this force is part of this kind of structure, right? Of articulation, destruction, entrance, exit, friendships, causes, and this is self-interest as self-interest qua the existent.
I think that's right. I think we should all go and be self-interested socialists from now on, instead of pretending to be acting always in the service of only others and so on. Anyway, I think we should we should let people go read the book. I mean, so thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully, I mean, I've actually really learned a lot from talking it through, Eliot, because it is a extremely theoretical book that takes some time to understand, but hopefully with this conversation as well, people will get there. And as I said, it's free, so you can download it just in the link there below.
It's theoretical, but once you get it, you get it, and once you get it, you can use it. And I've talked even to friends, and it's like, oh, now something has clicked into place.
Well, that's what just happened to me. I mean, I always thought there were parts of the book which I could use and I understood, but I do just feel like the penny just dropped, and I understand it
because once it clicks into place and it connects with, now you see how it relates. Now you see Joker's society. But now you see how it clicks into the outside world kind of seamlessly, like it's correct. It doesn't do everything because it doesn't expound on the forces of all processes, which need to be done individually with each process, right?
There's no problem with Eliot's ego. Okay, well, goodbye, everyone. Next Friday, if you're still here, next week, I'm going to have
that's a funny comment too, because there is also individual ego, self-interest.
We're not carrying on talking. Next Friday, my own PhD supervisor, my old PhD supervisor, Jeremy Tambling. He's amazing. He's written 30 plus books on all kinds of things, literature, politics, philosophy, but several books on psychoanalysis. He'll be on, and I haven't seen him in quite some years, so it should be a really nice episode. So looking forward to that, and see you all next Friday. Have a good weekend. Bye.